some of these groups of mollusks. So the first one we're going to look at are going to be the Skaffapods, and I guess I should have put these in order, but in a sense, I guess it also doesn't matter. And there are 8 of these groups, so there we go. And so it would be useful to know these 8 groups and just have a little something about each one in your mind, I think, going into the test. So let's see, we'll start with the Skaffapods. They are called tusk shells, and there are a few different species out there. They are hollow, so they're a long hollow tube, and these things tend to burrow. They tend to be found down in the mud, but you can actually get some of them out, and so there are some pictures here. So these are some of them on the inside of a fish tank, and so you can see that long tusk-shaped shell, and here is the rest of the creature. So if I remember right, these would be blind because they usually live buried. And so this is the muscular foot that's stretching out, and it's going to pull the rest of that shell along. Now they're going to be breathing in and eating down here at the bottom, and their waste is going to go out the top. So it's not so much a shell as it is a chimney. Oh, there, did you see that? So we stretched out and then we pulled the shell along behind. Kind of like you would think a snail would do, although these are a very primitive branch of the mollusks. Here's another set, and this may be the same lab, but here you go. They've been pulled out, and I think they have these things. I think they put some agarose into the tank, or some, I don't know, cotton or something, and you can see that the animals are burrowing. They like to live with their mouth parts right down underneath the bottom, and with just that sort of chimney spout where all their waste is going to come out sticking up above. And so these are actually pretty nearly in life position. They have buried themselves just like they would in the real world because, there's trying to run away from your terrible forceps. All right, so those are tusk shells, just so you get a look at them, and those are called Skaffapods. Next shell is going to be a monoplecophoran, I believe. And so monoplecophora, let's go back up here. So the pleco means plate, and monoplecophora are one plate havers. And so, these are the ones that have just a single shell that grows on the top. You can see a picture of a tusk shell here. So most of the body and organs are going to be up inside here. But once again, here's the mouth. Here is where we're going to spit that water out at the top. And this is the gonads and the digestive glands down here. And there's our mouth down there. And so it's going to feed into here. This is just like a water tube, and this is the rest of the digestive tract right there. And so, we're going to vent our waste out into this tract, which is also how we're going to breathe. And then we're going to sense and look for food down here, and that's what's going to go into the mouth. That is the idea. Monoplecophorans look a lot like this on the inside. Neat thing about them is they have some duplication of certain organs, and that's a trait that we saw with the annelids. And so it suggests, and the family trees suggest, that annelids and mollusks are actually pretty close in genetic terms. And I think there's a lot that's really kind of similar about them. So on this one, you'll see duplication of the gills. You can see it's got 5 sets of basically the same gills on either side. Really, it's just bilaterally symmetric. A mouth here, anus there, and a digestive tract running through the middle, and one big shell that covers the top. But that's an annelid sort of trait that probably we're making a little too much of. It's probably not as big a deal to the mollusk, but it does suggest what the DNA shows. These are the other 2, and we'll get to them in just a sec. So I couldn't actually show you any videos with monoplecophorans in them because there aren't any on YouTube that I can see. But you see these little squiggly trails right down at the bottom. So this is a very deep sea exploration. Those are made by these guys. Actually, no, there. Is that one? Yeah, that is one. Yeah. And those are, we believe, monoplecophorans. So these little trails are where they move along, and they have that radula, remember, like a little rake. And so they're just going to rake all this food up into their mouths. And that's what they do. So that's a monoplecophoran track. and one little monoplacophore in there, but he's not really doing anything. So it's okay. It's the best we can do, but it's not great. So I've tried to purchase a couple from each group of shells, and we have quite a few in the collection, but we have no monoplacophorans, and I've actually looked for them, tried to find somewhere where I could buy them, and it doesn't exist. These are very rare, and they're only very deep down in the ocean. And so, yeah, you can't have them. A couple museums have some of these, but they are just super rare in the world. And so we can look at them, but we can't really, I can't really show you them, which is a shame. Okay, and so after the monoplacophorans, let's look at the polyplacophorans. So here we go. This is a thing called a chiton, Chiton, and chitons live on the rock. Chitin is in insect shells, or as the bottom layer of making a mollusk shell. And as you can see, these guys are going to have 8 shells typically, so a front one, a back one, and 6 in the middle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And these are articulated like a suit of armor, which means that each of these shells can slide over the others, so that this thing can curl up and change shape, but they still provide good armor protection. And then this around the outside is actually covered in what look like little teeny weeny versions of the shell. And this is the mantle. This is the part that would normally be quite squishy, but even that, they have armored up. I remember as a child trying to pry one of these things off a rock in Florida with a pocket knife, and I ended up cutting myself pretty badly, and I could only ever get about half of it off. They really stick down. Apparently, you have to try and sneak up on them and pop them off really fast. Otherwise, they're just about impossible to get off of a rock. So there you go. Anyway, here's the chitin, and you can see it actually moving. So it's really just like a monoplacophoran on the inside. It has a little radula, and it's going to move along and scrape. But when the tide is out, these things can actually crawl along, and they can feed. They can, they're armored, so nothing's going to come down and get them pretty much. And they can just start scraping the rocks. They can also do this when the tide is in. They're very clever, and they'll make little resting holes. They'll sort of carve out little burrows, and they will tend to go back to the same one and sleep in it every single night, which is pretty neat. There you go. So there's a nice little chitin. And so that's a polyplacophoran because it has multiple plates on its back. Let's look at another one. This is the radula of a chitin. And let's rewind that to the beginning. And so there you can see the tongue, and then there they are. Those are the little teeth. They're going to work like a rake. And you see how each one of those has a little, kind of a little hook at the end. They're going to scrape these along rocks and just pull any of the material that comes off into their mouth. And they're going to plug the gap. That's like swallowing. And then, yeah, do it again. So boom, look at those little radula go. Pretty cool. And this is exactly how all the bivalves that you're going to be familiar with, things like snails, for example, are going to eat, with a little radula like that. And we think this is very primitive. We think the earliest mollusks probably had something very much like this sort of setup. And yeah, some of these gumboot chitins are that big, quite literally. Yeah. So rather than watch an ad, yeah. Let's jump over here, and here are some gumboot chitins. And this one is going to reproduce. So you can see this one's probably a male, and that looks like sperm coming out. And then, yep, there's another one. So bloop. These things are big. If you held your hands together, they would cover both of your hands. They had these at an aquarium up in Alaska, and they're just in the touch tank, along with all these purple starfish. And you can pick them up. It was really cool. We visited them last summer. And so this is a female, so she's releasing a bunch of eggs. There we go. And so as long as the eggs and the sperm are released at about the same time, these things can find each other, but they're both just going to broadcast it out there into the world and hope that, the two make a little love connection. So isn't that nice? All right. So the next two groups rather, are going to be the Solenoid Gas Trees and the Caudofoveata. And so let's go up to our little chart. Solenoid Gas Trees are going to be worm-like, and Caudophobiata are also worm-like, and they are both covered with chitin. So the Solenoid Gas Trees have a chitin cuticle with aragonite, so that form of calcium carbonate, little spikes, spicules, or scales on it. And yeah, this is a chitinous cuticle with normally chitinous spicules or scales, if I remember correctly. But they both look very similar to the tusk shell animal. It's just that they do not have a shell. And so these things will live burrowed either in the ground, or I think some of these things can dig into, into other types of substrate. So let's see a couple of them. Here's their little body plans. You got a mouth at one end and the gills and anus down at the other end. One of these is Solenoid Gas Trees. The other is Caudophobiata. And honestly, I don't think you can tell accurately by looking at them. There are a couple famous species, but other than that, it's tough. But look at the embryos. You see that little band of cilia around the middle? That's a trochophore larva. Yeah, fantastic. Just like we remember. So you know where these things are in the tree. Let's go see some of them in action. So here's one that's in the Solenoid Gas Trees. And let's turn that audio off. And so it's going to be this whitish worm, if we can get this goofball to, there we go, focus and leave it focused. There we are. And so what this little mollusk is trying to do is burrow. So this is not an annelid, even though it kind of looks like a worm. There's a little bivalve sitting on top of it. Oh, please just focus and leave it there. There we go. Ah, goofballs. So there's a little bivalve. There is Solenoid Gas Trees. This is a foraminifera shell over here. To give you an idea of the scale, these are tiny, 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 tiny little creatures. So it continues to wriggle around in different focus for the entire rest of the video. And you can watch the rest of that on your own. And then this is going to be one of the Caudophobiata, which this particular species is a little fluffier. And so it's going to have chitin plates down here. And if I remember right, it's going to have those little aragonite spicules coming out of there. So it's using the same sort of equipment, the same sort of genetic equipment that other mollusks use to make a shell. It's either just stopping with chitin in the one case, or it's putting aragonite on the outside of it and just in the form of little spikes instead of in the form of a big thick shell. And that's the other way that this happens. And so all of these videos are here, and they're nicely labeled on the Blackboard site. And so we've got right up to there, and in the next section we'll look at bivalves and gastropods, and then we'll look at cephalopods a little bit later. So thank you very much.